Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 53, Dimensional Infinity. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we turn to one of the most profound implications hidden inside this language. Our climb through the master tree has been deep and demanding. We began with the alphabet of phi, omega, k, and motion as v, learning the difference between the underlying mathematical code and the living language it generates. We discovered that dimensions do not end with those first letters, that every derivative casts three shadows: temporal, spatial, and motion echoes. We built the three great echo towers to house these dimensional meanings. We then witnessed their fundamental interweaving, understanding that reality speaks in braided sentences, not isolated words. We have reached the conceptual summit where we can see the full landscape of this language. But now, as we gaze out from this vantage point, we notice something extraordinary about the horizon. It does not end. The branches above us continue upward, forever. The towers we have built do not have roofs. Today, we confront the breathtaking consequence of this fact. If the derivative tree is infinite, then so are the dimensions themselves. Today, we contemplate what I call dimensional infinity. This is where we learn that reality is not only detailed, it is infinitely refinable, and that time, space, and motion are inexhaustible wells of meaning. We have spoken again and again of climbing the tree, of ascending to higher floors in the echo towers. That language might quietly suggest that there is a top floor, a final, ultimate derivative where the questions stop, where we finally hold a complete description of a pattern's timing, its perfect form, and its exact journey. That suggestion is comforting, but it is an illusion. The master tree of phi's derivatives is infinite. There is no last derivative. For every question about how phi changes, we can ask a finer question. How fast is phi changing here in time? Gives us omega. How is that rate of change itself changing? Gives us alpha. How is that change of the rate of change evolving? Gives us temporal jerk. This chain can continue indefinitely: snap, then higher refinements, and then refinements of those refinements. The same is true for spatial derivatives of phi, such as curvature, rate of change of curvature, and every more delicate description of how patterns bend and twist. It is also true for mixed derivatives that couple time, space, and motion together. This infinity of the tree has a direct and profound consequence for our three towers. Infinite derivatives create infinite echo layers. The temporal echo tower is not a building with a fixed number of floors. It is a tower with, in principle, endlessly many levels, each offering a more precise way of hearing the story of change. The spatial echo tower has infinitely many galleries, each revealing a finer level of structure in form. The motion echo tower has infinitely many balconies, each tracking more subtle influences on the journey of patterns through the world. Dimensional infinity is simply the recognition that, within this language, the refinement never ends. This is not just a mathematical curiosity, it is a statement about the fundamental nature of reality when it is expressed through phi. To make this more tangible, let us look at each dimension in turn and feel what it means for it to be inexhaustible. First, there is no final time resolution in the story of phi. Think of a musical note sustained by a violin. At first, you hear its pitch, its frequency, its omega. That is the first temporal echo. Listen more carefully, and you may notice a gentle vibrato, a slow wobbling of the pitch. That wobble is like an alpha acting on omega, the rate of change of the frequency. Now listen even more closely, or imagine having an instrument sensitive enough to analyze the finest details of the sound. The vibrato itself may start gently and stop abruptly, or it may be modulated by slower swells in loudness. All of these features correspond to higher temporal derivatives. There is no single final description of the note's timing that uses only a small finite handful of numbers. The air pressure at your ear can, in principle, be decomposed into an infinite series of temporal refinements. Time, as expressed through phi, is infinitely deep. Next, there is no ultimate spatial detail. Imagine tracing a coastline on a map. From far away, at the scale of a continent, the coastline looks smooth, a simple curve with a gentle curvature. Zoom into a smaller scale, and you see bays and peninsulas. Zoom further, and each bay has little inlets, and each inlet has rocks and ledges. Go lower, and you see the grain of the stones, then their crystals, then the arrangement of atoms, then the shape of electron clouds. At every level, new structure appears. There is no final, once-and-for-all snapshot that tells the complete spatial story. The spatial echo tower is also infinitely deep. Phi's spatial pattern can always be described at a finer derivative level. The same holds for motion. Watch a leaf falling from a tree on a breezy day. At first glance, you notice its overall downward motion, an average velocity. Look again, and you see it speeding up, slowing, and changing direction. So you add acceleration to your description. Look more closely, and you notice small jerks and twitches, rapid changes in acceleration caused by swirling air. Each of these layers of description depends on more delicate information about the airflow, the shape and flexibility of the leaf, and the subtle couplings between them. To capture the exact path of a single point on that leaf, down to every tiny flutter, you would need, in principle, an infinite sequence of derivatives describing all those influences. The motion echo tower is also infinitely guided. Taken together, these examples show that dimensions themselves, as they appear in the holophase language, are not simple flat stages. They are infinitely structured. Time is not just a single axis, but an infinite hierarchy of possible refinements of rhythm. Space is not just a three-dimensional box, but an infinite hierarchy of possible refinements of form. Motion is not just basic displacement, but an infinite hierarchy of possible refinements of how journeys are shaped. Dimensional infinity is the statement that reality, expressed through phi, is infinitely refinable in all three aspects at once. At this point, a natural worry arises. If the true description is infinite, how do finite minds and finite tools like ours manage to do science at all? How do we build working theories, design machines, or make useful predictions? The key is to realize that we always live inside a practical slice of this infinity. We never need and could never handle the full infinite description. For any specific purpose, there is some finite level of refinement that is enough. The art of physics, engineering, and all sciences is the art of choosing the right truncation of the tree for the problem at hand. If you want to predict the orbit of the Earth around the Sun over a few years, you do not need to account for every subtle derivative in the cosmos. Newton's law of gravitation, which uses a spatial potential and its gradient, gives an excellent approximation. For most purposes, the lower floors of the tower are sufficient. Only when you push for extreme precision, or very long times, or very strong fields, do you need to climb higher into the tree and bring in the corrections of general relativity. If you are designing a bridge, you treat steel and concrete as continuous materials with stress and strain fields. You use spatial derivatives of displacement and time derivatives of motion. You do not track the quantum states of every atom in the structure. Those higher derivatives exist, and in principle they matter, but they can be safely ignored for the scales and tolerances involved. The finite truncation works. If a doctor is diagnosing a heart rhythm, they look at an electrocardiogram. They are essentially reading the lower floors of the temporal echo tower of the heart's electrical activity. They care about the heart rate, its variability, and the broad shapes of the waves. The microscopic dynamics of every ion channel in every cell are part of the infinite story, But for most diagnoses, they do not need to be modeled explicitly. The lower floors tell enough of the truth. In this way, every walking theory is like a decision to say, for this phenomenon, these particular derivatives of phi carry the main story, and the higher ones only whisper small corrections. Dimensional infinity then becomes a kind of reassurance. It tells us that if our model ever stops working well, we can always climb higher, add more structure, and improve our predictions. The tree never runs out of room. In terms of language, dimensional infinity means that the holophase is a language with an infinite vocabulary and an infinite grammar. Each derivative of phi is like a word or a syllable that allows you to express a particular nuance of change, form, or movement. A language with only a few words can capture only coarse experiences. A language with many words can capture subtle feelings, precise ideas, and intricate stories. The holophase language, by offering infinitely many possible derivatives and combinations, is expressive enough, in principle, to describe any pattern reality can take. In scientific terms, dimensional infinity answers a deep question. It tells us that there is no ultimate limit to how finely we can interrogate the story of phi. No matter how fast our detectors, how precise our clocks, or how sharp our microscopes become, the field always has more to reveal. Any finite dataset, however detailed, corresponds to some cut through the infinite story. There are always further layers of modulation, structure, and influence that could be exposed with finer tools. Even the idea of infinity itself has a temporal, spatial, and motion expression inside this framework. Temporally, infinity shows up as the fact that any time series can be analyzed with higher and higher resolution. We can always look for slower drifts or faster flickers inside what once seemed smooth. Spatially, it appears as the familiar feeling that whenever we zoom in, we find more structure. From galaxies to stars to planets to mountains to grains of sand to molecules and beyond. Kinematically, infinity appears in the sensitivity of complex systems, like weather, in which tiny differences in initial conditions, too small for us to know exactly, grow into large differences in outcomes. Each of these is a different face of the same underlying depth. Within the master tree, dimensional infinity is not a single branch standing alongside curvature or acceleration. It is more like the open sky above the tree. It is the acknowledgement that there is no ceiling to how high we can climb. Every derivative we have already discussed is one rung on an endless ladder. Every law we have written, every equation we have trusted, is a relation between a finite collection of these rungs. This leads naturally to a powerful way of testing whether we are truly dealing with a smooth, infinitely refinable field like phi. The idea is convergence. If our understanding is correct, then as we include more relevant derivatives in our models, our predictions should get closer and closer to what we actually observe. We should see a pattern in which the first approximation gets us near the target, and each additional refinement brings us a little closer, without wild swings or contradictions. This is exactly what we see in some of the most successful theories in physics. Quantum electrodynamics, the theory describing how light and charged matter interact, computes quantities like the magnetic moment of the electron using an infinite series of correction terms. Each term can be understood, in a broad sense, as accounting for higher and higher refinements in how the field behaves. The first term gives a rough answer. The next term adds a small correction. The next adds a yet smaller one, and so on. We never need the full infinite series. A few terms already match experiments to astonishing precision. The pattern of steady improvement as we climb higher is exactly what we expect from dimensional infinity. We see similar behavior in many other areas. In fluid dynamics, basic equations use first derivatives of velocity to model viscosity and flow. More subtle fluids, like those in your body or in complex materials, may require higher order derivatives, and adding them improves the match between theory and experiment. In optics, when we model very short light pulses, we expand the relation between frequency and wave number in a series and keep as many terms as we need. For long, gentle waves, the first term is enough. For ultra-short pulses, we must keep several. In neuroscience, Understanding how a neuron encodes information can start with simple firing rates, then be refined by adding timing patterns and correlations across networks. Each extra derivative layer of description adds nuance and predictive power. Outside strict science, you can also feel dimensional infinity in human domains. Take history. At school, you might learn a simple story with dates and events. Later, you might study deeper causes like economics, culture, and psychology. Further still, you might explore how those deeper causes themselves were shaped by geographic patterns, technological constraints, and ancient narratives. There is no final, closed level of explanation. The more you look, the more layers of influence you can uncover. Or think of reading a profound novel. On one reading, you follow the plot. On another, you notice themes and symbols. With more attention, you see patterns in how sentences are crafted, how images are repeated, how silence is used. Each new reading adds detail and depth. The text itself is finite, but the possible derivatives of interpretation feel unbounded. In this way, art mirrors the infinite expressive depth of phi. In daily life, you can train yourself to notice the signs of dimensional infinity. Whenever you look closer at something and see more detail instead of hitting a hard limit, you are feeling its spatial depth. Whenever a more precise instrument reveals new features in a signal that looked smooth before, you are feeling its temporal depth. Whenever a more careful model reveals new influences on motion, you are feeling its kinematic depth. The very fact that our understanding and our technologies can keep improving is a living sign that the field we inhabit has not run out of complexity. Now we return, as always, to the source. Dimensional infinity is not something we bolted onto the Holophase picture. It is a direct consequence of starting with one continuous field phi and allowing it to have derivatives of all orders. The infinite derivative tree and the infinite echo towers are just what happens when that assumption is unpacked fully. Phi is not infinite because it is spatially huge or temporally eternal, although it may be. It is infinite because its structure is deep. It can be asked, how do you change in endlessly many ways, and it always has an answer. Seen in the context of our whole journey, dimensional infinity is the final widening of the view. We began close to the ground, learning the alphabet of the Holophase language. We climbed step by step through the discovery of triunity, the echo towers, and their interweaving. Now we can stand back and realize that there is no outer wall around this landscape. The map stretches out without edge. Whatever we do next, whichever branch we choose to explore, there will always be a higher refinement, a deeper echo, a more subtle derivative waiting above it. For us as human beings, this has a double emotional impact. On one hand, it is humbling. We are finite creatures with finite lifetimes, working with finite models and finite data. We will never hold a complete infinite sentence that describes even a single moment of reality. Our knowledge will always be partial and approximate, and there will always be more to learn. On the other hand, this is the source of wonder. Because the towers are infinite, nothing is ever finally exhausted. A single tree, a single cell, a single human mind can be studied for generations without being drained of mystery. Every new instrument, every new theory is not closing a book, but opening another chapter in an endless story. Dimensional infinity is the guarantee that reality will remain interesting. You yourself are a finite expression of this infinite depth. Your body, your brain, your experiences, and your relationships are all shaped by countless derivatives of phi that you will never see directly. Yet here you are, capable of reflecting on the infinite structure in which you are embedded. You are like a wave in the ocean that can look back and say, I am made of water, and the ocean's depth has no end. As we close this part of our journey, let this understanding settle gently. The Holophase language tells us that there is one field, phi, whose derivatives form an infinite master tree. From that tree come the three echo towers of time, space, and motion, and their intimate interweaving. Dimensional infinity reminds us that this whole structure has no ceiling. In every direction, there is more meaning available than any finite being could ever grasp. Now, perhaps, Look at something utterly ordinary near you: the surface of your hand, the fiber of your clothing, the light on the wall. Behind that simple appearance lies an infinity of description, from molecular structures to electromagnetic fields to quantum amplitudes, all woven into that one small patch of reality. You are living inside a universe whose every corner is infinitely rich, a universe expressed by one continuous field whose depth never ends. To make this more personal and practical, you can treat dimensional infinity as a gentle training for how you look at the world. When you feel frustrated that something seems too complex, remember that complexity is exactly what you should expect from a reality written in an infinite language. Instead of demanding that the world reduce to a single simple cause, you can become curious about which level of description is appropriate for the question you are asking. Sometimes the right move is to go simpler and coarser, to see the big pattern. Sometimes the right move is to go finer and deeper, to notice hidden structure. Dimensional infinity gives you permission to move up and down this ladder without guilt. You can also use this idea to soften your view of other people. Every person you meet is an expression of a derivative tree so deep that you will never fully know it. Their history, their biology, their memories, their relationships, their hopes and fears, all of these are shaped by layers of influence that go far beyond what you can see in a single interaction. When you remember that, it becomes easier to replace quick judgment with patient curiosity. You're not just meeting a name and a face, you're encountering a local, finite cross section of an infinite holophase story. Dimensional infinity can even reframe how you think about your own growth. If you are made of this same field, there is no fixed limit to the refinement of your understanding, your character, or your skills. You will always be living inside a finite slice of your own potential, but that slice can keep shifting and widening. Every time you learn a new idea, break an old habit, or heal a pattern of pain, you are effectively moving to a slightly higher floor in the tower that describes you. Your life does not have to be a closed loop. It can be an open spiral, climbing gently through the infinite structure that your being makes possible. This perspective also brings a kind of ethical responsibility. If reality is this richly structured, then crude interventions often have deep, unintended consequences. When we cut down a forest, rearrange an ecosystem, or deploy a powerful technology, we are not just moving a few pieces on a simple board. We are disturbing a finely woven web of derivatives, many of which we do not yet understand. Dimensional infinity invites humility in action. It suggests that careful, reversible, well measured experiments, both in science and in society, are wiser than bold, irreversible changes made in ignorance. At the same time, the infinite depth of phi means that repair and regeneration are also possible in ways we might not expect. Because there are many layers of structure, there are many possible points where healing can begin. A damaged ecosystem can recover if enough of its key patterns are allowed to reemerge. A traumatized nervous system can, over time, develop new pathways and responses. In an infinitely expressive field, there are many possible futures compatible with the present state. Dimensional infinity quietly carries, inside its formal meaning, a seed of realistic hope. You can even turn this into a simple daily practice. Pick any small, ordinary phenomenon, like the sound of a kettle boiling, the pattern of cracks in the pavement, or the way your chest moves as you breathe. First, describe it in the simplest possible terms, like a child. Then ask yourself, if I wanted to be more precise, what else could I notice here? What finer rhythm, what smaller detail, what subtler influence could I pay attention to? This little exercise is a way of deliberately moving one or two steps higher in the derivative description of your own experience. Over time, it trains you to feel the layered nature of reality without needing any equations at all. Finally, dimensional infinity can soften the fear that sometimes hides inside scientific ambition. The fear that one day there will be nothing left to discover, that the book of nature will be fully read and closed. In the holophase view, that day will never come. There will always be more structure to uncover, more relationships to map, more echoes to hear. Even if, in some future, humanity develops a compact, elegant equation that captures the core dynamics of phi, that equation will still describe an infinite tree of consequences. Knowing the alphabet and the grammar of a language does not empty its library of meaning, it makes the writing of new stories even more powerful. In this sense, dimensional infinity is not just a property of the universe. It is a promise made to curious minds. It promises that there will always be another question worth asking, another pattern worth noticing, another connection worth following. It tells you that your curiosity is not a temporary tool to be discarded at the end of history. It is a natural response of a finite expression waking up inside an infinite field, and it will always have room to move. Carry this with you as a quiet compass, reminding you that depth and possibility are always present around you in everything. Salam, and peace be upon you.